Hello and welcome to the third symposium session for the British Society of Gerontology virtual conference on the 3rd of July 2020. I'm Matt Jones, Associate Professor of Public Health at the University of the West of England, and today's session is co-research with older people from aspiration to application. Wherever you go, it's hard not to hear about co-research and co-production in the context of research with older people. And this year's conference has been no exception, where the topic of co-production has already been coming up in, for example, yesterday's symposium on housing. So today we have contributions from 3 leading research groups in England, each of which have been building on the stock of research about how to do co-production. First up, we have Joe and Jan reflecting on researcher identity in co-research, drawing upon the work as part of the Bristol Ageing Better programme. Secondly, Mo, Sally, Sue and Kate in Lincoln, Birmingham and Brighton discuss a 3-year project that embedded co-research into the study of self-funded care. And finally, Tina, with support from Hayley from Manchester, will examine the state of the art through the presentation of a systematic review on the subject. There'll be time for discussion afterwards, and you're welcome to send through questions through the BSG conference email. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Jo White from UWE, and today we're going to be talking about co-research identities and co-production practice in the Bristol Ageing Better programme. As interest grows in co-research practice with older people, we want to share our learning about the role of researcher identity and identity dynamics in our joint work. Our co-research project involved 11 older volunteer CRs or community researchers who work closely with UWE in the evaluation of BAB, Bristol Ageing Better. BAB was a 5-year citywide programme which aimed to address loneliness and social isolation amongst older people. BAB was perhaps unusual in terms of its longevity, which meant the CRs developed a strong sense of team membership, as well as a close working relationship with UWE and BAB staff. In our presentation today, we'll briefly explore some of the identity issues which emerged, which we define according to the following themes: self-concept, engagement in the study topic, researcher identity, and identity in the new COVID-19 landscape. The CR's biographies were significant. Many of those who chose to become community researchers were at the early stages of retirement, a major transitional stage in life, which can pose challenges to identity and one's sense of self. Some CRs openly describe missing the world of work. The theoretical literature describes how one's self-concept is founded on the information and affirmation we obtain from our various social environments and interactions. And self-concept confusion can arise under certain conditions, particularly life transitions such as retirement. And this can be linked to depression as well as loneliness. So in this sense, the community researcher role offered a new and socially valued identity and selfhood post-retirement. And as this was a voluntary role, it also offered greater freedom than conventional work responsibilities. Another feature of the CR's work linked to their personal identity was their close engagement with the BAB focus, namely loneliness and social isolation amongst older people. This engagement was intellectual, experiential, and emotional. Many of the CRs had already reflected on loneliness through their own experiences, the experience of those close to them, or in relation to concerns for their future as they aged. They shared these reflections with UWE and BAB partners, and this influenced programme understanding, and they also applied these reflections to their own evaluation work. A number of CRs highlighted the complex aspects of emotional well-being contained within the often paired concepts of loneliness and isolation, and they emphasised the need for careful definitions and distinctions. Unpicking these two concepts has now become quite mainstream, but this was an important element of BAB's learning. In the words of one CR, "I think you can be isolated and perfectly content. Loneliness implies something different, that you want something else, there's something missing. There are different sorts of loneliness. I think it's one of these blanket terms, and we need more words really to describe it." In programme discussions, the CR's experiences and reflections also directly challenged any stereotyping of older people as one homogenous group, as this quote from one of the CRs demonstrates. So if the CRs had not been from an older age group, sharing their insights and posing questions from their experiences, the BAB evaluation and its impact on the programme might have looked very different. And now Jan, one of the community researchers, is going to talk about researcher identity.
Over the 5 years of the BAB, the CRs developed a strong sense of identity as individual researchers and as a team. I think our initial expectations were that community research would largely involve interviewing, but we received training and developed skills and competencies whereby we influenced discussions within the programme and participated in the whole evaluation cycle, all with the welcome support from the UWE team. This has been very much an experience of co-research, where we developed into equal partners rather than just participating. Our identity as researchers led to some very interesting discussions. One example was the sense of fraudulence in our representing older people as a group, particularly given the lack of ethnic and socio-economic diversity within the team. And this led to debates concerning the advantages and disadvantages of being an outsider or an insider in evaluating community initiatives. A research reflexivity workshop was held to explore our identity as CRs in more depth. This involves sharing personal characteristics and values, reflecting on how these might influence our interactions with others, and how to manage our communication as researchers effectively. We would recommend this kind of exercise early in any CR project, as it recognises the significance of personal identity in our endeavours and encourages good, reflexive research practice. It can also build trust within the research team and work through any vulnerabilities associated with the role. So being a CR has been a significant part of our lives for the past 5 years or more. And when the BAB programme started winding down early this year, this posed a new transition phase for us. The question of what next arose regularly, and there was a risk of a gap emerging in our lives. BAB and UWE shared with us possible new areas of work, but then along came COVID. The lockdown has impinged upon all aspects of our lives. Some of us have felt frustrated at not being able to work as volunteers during the lockdown, either in previous roles or in response to COVID. However, the BAB CR team continues. Some have been making PPE, and some are involved with other forms of volunteering, albeit remotely. But our identities as active and contributing members of society have taken a knock, and we recognise that we, as older people, are to some degree more vulnerable. Our reflections about ageism, which we shared in our BAB work, have become more pertinent in the current context of policy-making decisions such as age-based shielding, herd immunity, and care home protection.
Thanks, Jan. So to close, our experience has shown that the community researcher role can be both productive and fulfilling. However, it's important to recognise and respond to the nuanced aspects of CR identity. This provides us a deeper understanding of the social and affective dimensions of co-research with older people. Thank you for listening.
Good afternoon. Our presentation today is about the evaluation of participatory approaches, which underpinned a 3-year, 3-site research project based at the universities of Brighton, Birmingham and Lincoln. The project's overarching aim was to co-produce knowledge with older co-researchers about the experience of older people who self-fund their care, a significant group about which little is known. Briefly, the evaluation set out to explore the opportunities, benefits, challenges and learning associated with working in 3 sites with 3 co-research teams, 3 academic teams, community partners and stakeholders who took part in a number of knowledge exchange events. I should now like to introduce you to Kate Holly and Sue Bennett, co-researchers based in Lincolnshire and Birmingham, and to Sally Cornish, who is the research fellow who carried out the evaluation.
Thank you, Mo. And I'm going to start talking about the methods used in the evaluation. The evaluation's research questions, with their focus on process and experience, pointed to a qualitative approach. And so questions for interviews with co-researchers, academics and stakeholders were drafted, and refined after consultation with the academic and co-researcher teams on each of the 3 project sites. The intention had been for prospective participants to be offered one-to-one semi-structured interviews, but the intervention of COVID and lockdown meant that interviews were conducted remotely, fewer stakeholders were involved, and some participants chose to make a written contribution. Thematic analysis is now being used to illuminate the place and value of co-production in the project and to identify points for reflection and learning about co-produced research practice. I'm going now to focus on a particular thread that runs through the results so far, which is the significance of relationships. This may be an unsurprising finding, given that co-production is essentially research in partnership, so in relationship with other people. However, the evaluation is showing the range of meanings relationships have in the project from the different perspectives of co-researchers, academics, and stakeholders. I'll say a little about this now, and at the end of the presentation, we'll touch on some of the potential questions the evaluation is raising about the challenges that may be inherent in co-production, alongside the opportunities and advantages it offers. So first, relationships form the foundations of the project, with existing networks and contacts offering opportunities for identifying and involving co-researchers and stakeholders, and indeed research participants. Not only were these relationships significant in that people were drawn together by their common concerns about the research topic, here the self-funding of older people's care, but also because individuals valued one another as people and wanted to work together. Second, relationships within project teams, so between co-researchers and academics, have provided the context and the means for every aspect of the research process, with regular meetings on each site as the backbone of the work. Within these teams, people relate to one another in ways that focus on individual strengths and characterise a culture of mutual respect, care, and shared commitment to the project. This has proved crucial in maintaining momentum and cohesion over a number of years and throughout the inevitable changes and challenges that arise in a long-term piece of work, not least a global pandemic. Finally, relationships have been the context for formal and informal learning with and from other people, with this learning bringing value to the knowledge produced by offering the benefit of co-researchers and stakeholders' lived experience. These include experiences of being and or caring for older people in personal, voluntary and professional capacities, the realities of navigating care provision, and the different local factors and issues that shape the care landscape at each of the 3 sites. So, having given this brief flavour of the evaluation, I'll turn now to Kate and Sue to speak about the project from their co-researcher perspective, starting with Sue from Solihull.
Hello. Attending meetings was the main commitment from us co-researchers. It was at meetings that we learnt from the academics about the research process, and where I feel the greatest challenge lay for the academics to develop inclusive relationships with us mixed bag of co-researchers. I believe the success of our team was due to the active listening and responding to ideas from all members of the team. This made me feel that my contribution and life experience were a valuable input. Tips for academics: be careful how you ask co-researchers for additional involvement. You don't want them to feel pressured. They're likely to withdraw from the team if everyone else is doing extra and they haven't got the time or don't feel capable. Academics need to be very patient. Processes that are routine to them will be completely new to a co-researcher, so may need explaining several times and over several meetings. I think the success of the co-research process is very much dependent on the personalities of the academics and the co-researchers. Academics should not give any hint to co-researchers that their involvement is sometimes a hindrance to getting on with the actual research.
I'm Kate, one of the volunteer co-researchers working with the University of Lincoln. Lincolnshire is a large rural county with a travel time of over 2 hours to travel from north to south, and the 10 co-researchers come from right across the county. A group of co-researchers brings many things to the project: access to a broad range of attitudes and beliefs, access to local knowledge and a range of networks, and access to a broad skills base and wealth of experience. One of the initial and essential processes early in the research was to identify and recruit older people who were self-funding their care, plus care providers and care workers who were willing and able to participate in the research. Flyers were produced centrally to be used by all 3 sites, but these didn't actually attract much interest. However, by utilising the local knowledge and personal contacts, the co-researchers facilitated the introduction of over 20 older people from right across Lincolnshire and a range of care providers and practitioners who otherwise may not have been reached. The access to a skills base has proved indispensable in the last couple of weeks, with the requirement to produce a short video presentation for Pearl, a university conference on public engagement. Who knew that we had a budding film director in our midst, otherwise known as Mike, a retired local government officer, or film cameraman and technical support Steve, retired head of IT, or presenters Lissy, head teacher, Ruth, pharmacist, Tony, Health Watch Board representative, and myself, public health. Along with a willing team spirit and desire to work together that has grown over the 3 years, this has been an enjoyable and productive experience.
Thanks, Kate and Sue. In conclusion then, now that we have highlighted and illustrated the significance of relationships in the project, I'll end with 3 wider questions raised by the evaluation to date. First, does the role of existing networks as bases for the project compromise inclusivity and diversity? If so, how? Does it matter? And how can this be addressed? Second, what are the resource implications for funders, universities and co-researchers of authentic co-production, given the time, attention and sustained commitment it requires of everybody involved? Finally, what does the close attention to the relational research process mean for knowledge production, and how is the knowledge produced affected by the context in which it arises? So that's the end of our presentation. Thank you very much indeed for listening, and we look forward to any questions or discussion points you may want to raise. Goodbye.
Good afternoon. I am Tina Buffel, and it's really great to see that for the 3rd year in a row, the BSG conference has a flagship symposium on co-production, commemorating Avril Osborne's life and her pioneering work on participatory research with older people. And this is an approach that has been a true inspiration to my own work in Manchester, where I have worked with older people in partnership in research, involving them as co-researchers. And this has generated an interest and curiosity into how other scholars and projects have developed co-production work with older people. And it is this interest that has led to the work that I will be presenting to you today, which is based upon a literature review on co-research with older people conducted by my colleague Hayley James and myself. And the need for a literature review was underpinned by a growing interest in user involvement, co-production and co-research, which is defined here as doing research with or by older adults rather than to, about or for them. But even though there is a growing interest in co-production, we also found that there is actually quite a limited amount of published work available showing how co-research with older people can be practically realized and what the challenges are. It is therefore important to learn from existing projects and to critically evaluate the state of the art of older people's involvement in research, especially if we consider participation to be a fundamental right following the philosophy of Avril Osborne. And this idea of connecting community participation in research to the wider citizenship rights accorded by society is also clear in this quote, which I like very much, from sociologist Cathy Marsh, who argued that for a real democratization of social research to occur, there will have to be changes, not just in the status of the researched, but also in the right to be a researcher. And it is very much this idea of the right to be a researcher that is a critical one in co-research projects with older people as well. So our literature review addressed 3 research questions. What are the aims and outcomes of co-research with older people? In what ways have older people been involved in different phases of the research cycle? And what are the challenges associated with involving older people in research, and how can these be overcome? In terms of methods, we followed PRISMA guidelines, which are preferred reporting items for systematic reviews and meta-analysis. And the search and selection strategy consisted of 3 steps, with the first involving searching relevant studies across a number of search platforms covering multiple disciplines, with the search being based upon 2 groups of search terms. The first being older person, people, adults, and the second including terms to reflect the participatory nature or methods, such as co-production, co-research, participatory, and action research. And together this took us to a total of 3,328 papers to consider. The second and the third step involved the screening of those articles against a number of exclusion and inclusion criteria. And I don't have the time to go into these in details, but to summarize, the review focused on empirical, peer-reviewed, published studies in English, which have actively involved older adults as partners in the research in more than one stage of the research cycle. So in total, this led us to consider 23 studies which were included in the qualitative synthesis. And the data analysis structured around the 3 research questions, with the first focusing on the aims and the outcomes. So what did the studies in the literature review aim to achieve by working in partnership with older people? And the analysis identified 4 categories. The first, most common aim concerned developing a deeper understanding, both of the experiences of older people, as well as the issues to be included and to be considered in research. And this was often linked to the benefits of sharing certain characteristics with interviewees, such as age, ethnicity, local language, or local knowledge, all of which were considered to be resulting in improved quality of data. A second theme related to the benefits to older co-researchers involved in the project. And some studies mentioned this as an aim of the project, but many more studies mentioned this as an outcome of the process, with older co-researchers reporting an increased self-esteem and the development of new skills arising from the research and leadership training as part of the project. A third aim concerned creating social change, policy change, community change, as well as improving services to make them more responsive to the needs of various groups of older people. A fourth theme focused on giving voice to marginalized groups of older people, as well as challenge power dynamics, a theme that was strongly represented in studies involving older LGBT co-researchers, but also older people diagnosed with dementia and ethnic minority older co-researchers. The second research question concerned the ways in which older people had been involved in different phases of the research cycle. And again, we found some really interesting findings here. The analysis showed, for example, that there were very few examples of studies that had involved older people in the development stage or in the activities to set up a research project, such as setting out the research problem and writing research bids. In contrast, all studies had involved older people as co-researchers in the data collection phase, with interviews and focus groups or a combination of those being the most common ways of collecting data. But whilst it was clear how older people were involved in data collection, there was a notable absence of detail about how co-researchers had been involved in analyzing the data and disseminating findings. Quite a few studies reported that older people were actively involved in these phases, but there was a lack of reporting how this had happened. And we think that future work could really benefit from sharing experiences about how this can practically be achieved. In terms of the challenges associated with involving older people in research, we found 3 main themes. The first related to issues of power and the risk of co-research to widen inequalities rather than reduce them, given that co-researchers who participate in training and research are often more privileged groups of older people compared to the interviewees, which may create potential tensions between different groups. A second theme relates to the challenges associated with co-production with different audiences and the need for negotiating the different expectations various partners may have, both from the research and the outcomes, but also in terms of the level and the ways in which people wanted to be involved. And a final set of challenges related to the resource issues faced by many co-research projects, with the time intensiveness of the process combined with limited resources seen as major barriers to achieving sustainability. So, to conclude, based upon our literature review, we can suggest a number of ways forward in developing this important line of participatory work with older people. First, it is clear that addressing the challenge of sustainability is critically important. And based on the studies, we found that one effective way of achieving sustainability is through developing partnerships that support a project from the very beginning and the outset of the project. Second, there's also a need to ensure that people can be involved in various ways in the project. And this requires an understanding of the motivations as well as the expectations of those being involved, as well as how these may change over the course of the research. Third, the review has shown the importance of training and supporting co-researchers in the process to encourage reflection and discussion, but also to recognize the skills that people bring and develop throughout the project. Fourth, we found that there is room for improving the rigor of co-research. And this could be done, for example, by embedding criteria such as validity, reflexivity, and relevance as key principles of research quality. Fifth, the analysis demonstrated the potential of co-research in creating change, whether these were changes in the communities, policies, and services. Importantly, we found that the studies that demonstrated this most powerfully were those where co-researchers were able to take ownership over such changes. And finally, our literature review also showed the importance of symposia such as the one we are having today, where academics, co-researchers, community partners can come together, discuss, share, and learn from each other's experiences. So these are a couple of ways that we think this important line of work could further develop. And we thank you very much for paying attention and participating in this symposium.
Great. Thank you, everyone. That was a fantastic set of presentations. I loved the way that they all fitted together, even though everyone was creating them independently today. We've got a little bit of time for questions, and I wanted to jump straight in there. Sue, I loved your tips about asking co-researchers about additional involvement, and it just made me think for question really for Sue, Kate, and Jan. If you were to give one piece of good advice to other community researchers embarking upon a similar journey, what would that advice be?
I would say to you need to listen carefully to all the people involved and really be open-minded in your approach. The training is important beforehand to make sure that the co-researchers, who are complete volunteers and from different walks of life, are up with the ethics and the protocol. For instance, we were the main leads in interviews with the participants, the older people, and I found it very difficult to remain impartial during those interviews, but I recognised, being a professional teacher in a previous career, that that was very important in the way that the questions were directed.
Thank you. Kate. Kate, we haven't got a...
Right.
We can hear you now.
You got me now? Yes, you got me now. I think from the point of the co-researchers I got an awful lot out of the project by having the opportunity to be involved in all aspects. And I got more understanding of the research and the way it was working by being involved in every stage. So I think that to give people that opportunity to opt in and out of every stage, and from the co-researcher point of view, from the volunteer, I think the ability to ask if you want to be involved, because I think maybe the academics would be reluctant to overburden volunteers, but if you can ask to be involved, I think that would be appreciated.
Jan. We've got a sound problem, Jan. Jan, I think we might have to come back to you until we sorted that one out. And it's the same with Joe, we can't hear you. Joe, if I could stop you there. I'm going to move on to just ask a bit about a question mainly for, if Sally, maybe you could start off. As it's really interesting to hear about your emphasis on the role of relationships. And I just wondered if you could say something a bit more about how, if at all, did that change the character of the research? Does this co-research model change the character of the research? For example, the how knowledge is produced. What changes did you see?
I think, I'm sure it does. I think picking up on something that Sue talked about, perhaps, about interviews and the way in which interview data is gathered. In not all cases, I don't think, did the co-researchers necessarily take the lead in interviews. There was flexibility about that across the project. But I think there was certainly a sense in which co-researchers can form a bridge, if you like, between academic research and the participants, and start to maybe raise questions which are useful to think about what are the differences between a regular conversation and a research interview. And on the one hand, while some of the boundaries around that are really important to be aware of, there's also something about challenging those boundaries, in which, from what I've heard, can actually mean that participants might be able to relax a little bit more in interviews and actually produce more rich accounts of what they've been going through. So I think there are some really interesting questions raised about the role of empathy in the data, because it does seem that sometimes participants were able to talk about aspects of their experience because they felt the co-researchers empathised in a way they felt, rightly or wrongly perhaps, the academics might not. So I think that's what I'd highlight.
Joe, do we have you on the line? Could you say hello?
Hi, can you hear me now?
Yes, I wondered if you had any further reflections on the link through to identity here, and how that affects the nature of the research.
Well, I think it really depends. It really depends on the focus of the research, I suppose. But yes, I think as I hope people heard it in my presentation, it really did. It was quite fundamental in the work we were doing. But in some senses, I think some of the reflections and the engagement through identity came out over time. I think in the early stages, when people don't know each other very well and are building trust and getting to know each other, some things are not so apparent. And I think what we tried to emphasize was maybe doing more reflexivity work early on to get to know each other and start understanding each other better in our relationship with the research topic. That's a really valuable early stage investment, I think, for building up relationships there. I've got the sound now for Jan, hopefully. Would it be possible to go back to that first question about what the community researchers think, what their sort of tips are, what their learning is? Jan, can you speak now?
Yes, what we think you're learning is But I think one of the things is recognising what experiences and skills that you bring, but not being blinkered by them. And by that I mean recognising that it is using those in a very new context, and that there's opportunities for learning a lot of new things to do with research. And one of the things that I know happened with us, which I think is very useful, is that there was an audit of our existing skills, but alongside it was our areas of interest and where we thought our training needs were, because in some cases, perhaps we had certain skills and experience, but we didn't necessarily feel that interested in using them. We wanted to do new things and try new stuff.
Thank you, Jan. A question maybe for Mo to start with is diversity and inclusivity came up as major themes. Do you think that there is, and this is an issue, you know, it's a widespread issue, but are there particular issues in the context of older people's research, and where do you see the solutions lying?
Yeah, I think it can be an issue. So, and one of the interesting things is we've seen significant differences across our 3 co-research teams in terms of the profile of the co-research team. So interestingly, in Brighton and Hove, their co-research team have been working with Lizzie for a number of years. And so they've evolved over more than one project, and they've continued to sort of age, and new people have come, and they've sort of evolved from the ground up a diversity and a level of experience that we don't see in quite the same way, for example, in Birmingham and in Lincolnshire. What I think is really difficult, we were looking for co-researchers across the whole of Lincolnshire, and we advertised sort of quite widely to try to encourage, you know, diversity in terms of responses. And we did get a reasonable diversity in terms of county representation and in terms of the range of people and the sorts of experience they had about care. But I've had some interesting conversations with co-researchers where they said, well, how picky were you? You know, what about turning people down if they didn't quite meet the diversity kind of tick, as it were? And my response to that is, I think that's a very difficult moral kind of place to be, really, ethical place to be, because I don't know what people's motivations are and what people are bringing to the co-research project. And so when we started to engage with co-researchers, the fact that they had an interest in care or they had direct experience of care, the fact that they had an engagement with the project was sufficient for me to want to engage with that person as a potential co-researcher. And as we got to know each other, some of the very hidden motivations and some of the, you know, the less obvious reasons for wanting to be part of the project became clear, which we couldn't possibly have known about at the beginning. So I think it's a complex process, and I think people come to co-research in different ways, and co-research groups grow in different ways, and I think we have to be conscious and reflexive about that when we're talking about them in the terms of our project. Thank you.
Tina, you given, I suppose, those resource issues that you highlighted with the authentic co-production, I just wondered, can we realistically make the case for co-research as an essential consideration for all research with older people, or is it forever going to be a sort of nice to have add-on that finds its niche but doesn't succeed in mainstreaming?
It's a good question. I think going for a co-research approach is kind of a real deliberate choice that you have to take from the very beginning, and engaging with the challenges and the opportunities that comes with from the very beginning with the people and the group you try to recruit is really a critical way to develop the project. So I don't really believe in the effectiveness of a tokenistic approach to working with people in specific aspects of the research, if this is, you know, not really aimed at enriching the project as well as improving the skills of people you work with and empowering people, I think it's very difficult to kind of reach the same aims and objectives than when you start up with a co-production approach, where you have a shared and a common interest in making sure that the research is kind of making a change and improving some aspects in the communities you work with, or the themes you work with. So I think this is the reason why in the literature review we also chose to look at those studies who have involved older people in multiple phases of the research. Because there's a lot of studies who say we've worked with older people in data collection, but for us it was really interesting to see what kind of studies are there that actually try to work with people in different aspects of the research, from developing a study, but also from translating those findings into certain actions or policy recommendations. So I think that was really what our interest was in conducting this literature review and developing the further work around this.
Thank you, Tina. That came across really strongly, and I wondered if others have reflections on that involvement of co-researchers beyond data collection. Joe and Jan, I know that the community researchers there have gone beyond just data collection.
Yes, Jan, do you want to share a bit about your experiences there with the analysis you've been involved in, for example?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think on different aspects of all the BAB work, the community researchers are really involved in the whole research process, including things like the design of and deciding what we were going to research. On the analysis, I think that, I mean, I can't speak for all of us, but I think on the whole we were involved in different amounts in the analysis, and that was by our choice. But I think all of us got involved in some of it, and it certainly was challenging in terms of the time and effort involved. But I remember early on we had one project where we were involved in the data collection, but then weren't involved in the analysis, and it felt really quite frustrating. So I think the analysis part is possibly what we found really fulfilling and gave us ownership of what we found.
Thank you. I wonder if Mo's team have any reflections in involvement beyond data collection.
Yeah, I'd like to say that I completely agree with Jan on the analysis and the fact that we really enjoyed as co-researchers listening to what each interview has actually been said and the involvement. And most of us did enjoy doing the analysis as well. And we were further involved in, there was an art installation at the 3 locations, and it was sort of the subject was older people and ageing, and at each site the co-researchers were involved as invigilators at the exhibition. And I felt personally that because we were involved, the people coming out, we were doing like a bit of a questionnaire with them, and I think we got a lot more out of the people coming out in their sort of descriptions, how it made them feel, and their ideas completely about aging and dying and that sort of thing, compared to if there's only been the art people, you know, involved with the gallery there.
Thank you. Yes.
Yeah.
Kate.
Yeah, we've also been involved in kind of discussing what kind of outputs we want, been involved collectively with Solihull on kind of writing a booklet for older people and things like that. So going on to how we're going to make use of all the data that has been collected. So that's been an interesting process. Yeah.
Great. And Sally, I think you've got your hand up.
Yeah, just really quickly to add to something that Kate said, that when I was speaking to co-researchers across the 3 sites, it was really evident that people didn't want all their work just to sit on a dusty shelf somewhere. There was a real commitment to getting this information out there. I think it may have taken a bit of extra momentum from COVID and the questions that has raised as well, but there was a real sense of this needs to be out there, both locally and nationally.
Great. There is a bit of a question about language here, isn't there, about the term research, and some debate about whether there's so much baggage with the term research that maybe should we use this term or not when we come to this kind of participatory engagement. Tina, where do you sit on the choice of language here? What did your review tell you, if anything, about this?
Well, I think I would come back to the quote I presented from Kathy Marsh, and which very much aligns with Avril Osborne's philosophy, who is, this symposium is dedicated to, is that the idea of participation being a fundamental right to researchers, but also to people involved in the research, is a crucial one, I think. So I would definitely say, yes, let's use the word research, because it is research conducted by people who are experts in the fields that we are exploring. So yeah, I would definitely use the word research or co-research to indicate the importance of participation of different groups in having a right to be a researcher.
And similarly, Mo's team, you had some choices about your language you used. You chose research as part of that. What was your thinking?
Because the people we collaborated with were going to be involved, obviously with their consent and with their full permission in every stage of the research process, and the point was that they would unsettle the ordinary, that they would challenge established power relationships. And I totally agree with Tina. It is research, and to call it otherwise risks patronising the involvement of co-researchers and also, minimising the potential importance of our endeavours. And I think that would be a mistake. I think it's very different, and I think we have to do more to be clearer and transparent about those differences and to report on the complexities of doing participatory research and what it brings to the party, which may be different from more traditional approaches to research.
Thank you. Jo and Jan, yes.
Can I just say that we had a really interesting gathering of people from different BAB projects about a year ago, and one of the discussions was something we already touched upon, which is about recruiting the more diverse groups to research. Although I would definitely call it research, and I can agree with everybody, there is an issue about recruitment, I think, and how you present what you're doing, and how I'm questioning a little bit whether the term research may be off-putting for some people who haven't got a very, their educational background's a bit different, or how they see themselves in relation to research, or may not understand research or really engage with it. It could be seen as off-putting. So I think I agree, we call it research. How we describe it and talk about it, the language we use in terms of potentially recruiting a wide range of people to be involved at different aspects of it as well. I think that's worth questioning that language then, and say, for example, in a recruitment leaflet, or when you're describing, if you ask somebody, would you be interested in collecting the experiences of people who have the, this condition or whatever, that's a very different way of pitching it and saying, would you like to be a co-researcher? I think for some people it's a much more inclusive way of describing it rather than saying, would you like to be a co-researcher? So that's just the additional thing I'd like to say about that. Jan, is there anything you'd like to say on this?
No, only that I would agree with that. I think many of us in our research group were actually attracted by the term that we were going to be researchers. But I would agree. I think it can exclude other people who would have something very valuable to bring. And one of the things that did concern us was about lack of diversity, and that we were unable to recruit many researchers from some of the communities that we were actually studying. Great,
yes. Yeah, no, really interesting that. Okay, so we are moving now to the close of our really interesting session. I feel it could have gone on for much longer. I echo Tina's words about it's great to see Avril Osborne's work and her legacy continuing to flourish here today. This session is recorded and will be available afterwards. And we're now moving over towards the close of the BSG virtual conference.